Hi, it's me from iReach. Today I'm going to talk to you about demand and supply. It's like the base of economics, IB, and you have to grasp these topics very tightly if you want to get a high score. So let's begin with demand. So demand is concerned with the behavior of buyers. So consumers or households are buyers of goods and services in product markets, whereas firms are buyers or factors of production in resource markets. In our analysis of demand and supply, we will focus mainly on product markets and therefore on the behavior of consumers as buyers. Though the same general principles described here apply also to the behavior of firms as buyers in resource markets. So let's begin with individual demand. As buyers, consumers are demanders of those items they wish to buy. The demand of an individual consumer indicates the various quantities of a good or service the consumer is willing and able to buy at different possible prices during a particular time period, ceteris paribus. To remind you, ceteris paribus means everything else remains constant and same. So here we have a little demand graph. So as you can see, we have the price of chocolate bars. So here you have $1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have quantity of chocolate bars per week. And this is our demand curve. Let's say if the chocolate bar is priced at $1, the demand, as you can see here, the demand for chocolate bars will be 10 chocolate bars per week. Whereas if the price of chocolate bars, let's say, is $4, the demand will be only 4 chocolate bars per week. So we can talk about the law of demand. So the law of demand means there is a negative relationship between the price of a good and its quantity demanded over a particular time period, ceteris paribus. As the price of a good increases, quantity demanded falls. As the price falls, the quantity demanded increases. So we can think of it like you would buy something much more as quantity if it was cheaper. So let's talk about market demand versus individual demand. So far we have considered the demand for a good of one individual consumer. Market demand shows the total quantities in the market for the good consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. So we have demand of consumer A here. It's like a pretty basic demand graph. And we had demand curve of a consumer B. And if we sum all of them with the other consumers in the market, we will have market demand. So we can say that market demand is the sum of all individual demands for a good. So let's continue with the non-price determinants of demand. The non-price determinants of demand are the variables other than price that can influence demand. They are the variables assumed to be unchanging by the use of ceteris paribus assumption. So changes in non-price elements cause shifts in the demand curve. So this was our initial demand curve. If there's an increase in demand, our curve slides rightwards. And if there's a decrease in demand, our curve shifts leftwards. So some non-price elements of demand are income, preferences and tastes, price of subsidized goods, price of complementary goods, and number of consumers. These factors, although are not price, they affect the demand of a certain good or service. So to summarize, a change in price produces a change in quantity demanded, shown as a movement on the demand curve. A change in a non-price element of demand leads to a change in demand represented by a shift of the entire demand curve. So that is demand basically. It's a pretty basic topic, so I hope I could tell it to you properly. So let's move on to supply. So supply is concerned with the behavior of sellers, which include firms in the product markets and households in resource markets. As we are focusing on product markets, we will consider the behavior of firms as sellers, though the same general principles also apply to sellers of factors of production in resource markets. So let's continue with individual supply. Firms produce goods and services and they supply them to product markets for sale. As sellers, therefore, they are suppliers of goods and services. The supply of an individual firm indicates the various quantities of a good or service a firm is willing and able to produce and supply to the market for a sale at different possible prices during a particular time period, as again ceteris paribus. If you are writing a definition in your exam, don't forget to write ceteris paribus because it's a critical part of the definition. So let's continue. We have another individual supply curve for our firm. So let's observe this quickly. We have price of chocolate bars and the quantity of chocolate bars per week. So let's say the price of the chocolate bars are going to be sold at a price of $5 per bar. And then we will look, and the firm can produce 600 chocolate bars per week if they are going to sell it at $5 per chocolate bar. But if they are going to sell it at $1 per chocolate bar, they can only produce 200 chocolate bars. So from there we can move on to the law of supply. As a good's price increases, the quantity of a good supplied also increases. So there is a positive relation between them. And again, if the price decreases, the quantity of goods supplied decreases. You can think of this like if they're going to sell the chocolate bar for $5, they can produce a chocolate bar for $4 and still make a profit. But if they are going to sell it for $1, they have to produce it less than $1 to make a profit. If they are not going to make a profit, they will not produce the chocolate bar. So let's move on to individual supply and market supply. So it's almost the exact same as demand. So we have the supply of firm A, supply of firm B, and we can conclude the market supply by combining, and taking the total of supplies of other firms in the market. So we can say that market supply is the sum of all individual firms' supplies for a good or a service. So there is a specific vertical supply curve. So as you can see, the price changes. So it can be $5, $2, $1, but the quantity produced, quantity supplied, still remains the same. This happens when price increases and the quantity remains constant. It is mostly seen as in limited goods. So, for example, theater tickets for one show, because there is limited seats, there is limited supply, or any limited items. So let's move on to the non-price determinants of supply. Alright, the shift of the supply curve indicates that more is supplied for a given price. A leftward shift of the supply curve indicates that less is supplied for a given price. A rightward shift of the curve is called an increase in supply. A leftward shift is called a decrease in supply. So some factors of non-price determinants of supply are cost of factors of production, like the resources a firm uses to produce its good. Technology, it might be advanced, it might create a new way to produce, or the price of competitive related firms, or the prices of related goods on joint supply. Producer expectations, what do they expect, what do they foresee in the future? Some taxes affected indirectly, and subsidies. So a movement along the supply curve caused by a change in price is called change in quantity supplied. So the supply curve remains the same, but it goes from point A to point B. As of in the right hand side, there is a decrease in supply and increase in supply. When there is an increase in supply, the supply curve shifts rightwards, and when there is a decrease, it shifts leftwards. So any change in price produces a change in quantity supplied, shown as a movement on the supply curve. Any change in determinant of supply other than price produces a change in supply. represented by a shift of the whole supply curve. So that's all for demand and supply. I hope I could convey this topic to you effectively. Thank you for listening.